Essentially, it is about us living pretty healthy life despite getting infected by various pathogens, which means viruses and bacteria which infect us. So we don't fall ill as frequently as we would. The research culture in India is such that the progress is very slow. Getting any chemical imported, for example, it normally takes 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks here. And if one is working in the United States in any laboratory, as I'm going home at 5 p.m., I put in an order, and next morning, by the time I come to work, the chemical is already delivered and is available for me to take it further. So, this slowness in research obviously affects the productivity, output, and so on. We used to take so called typhoid vaccine, and we thought we were all really protected because we took vaccine. As I became an immunologist and started thinking, I realized that vaccine was completely useless. So priority these days and all along is that post-vaccination, individuals should not fall ill. They will get infection, but there is enough immunity in the body so that the illness is certainly prevented. And also there are people who resist taking vaccination. Again, you have to look at it from social responsibility. That if my family does not take vaccines and my family falls ill, I'm responsible for spreading that infection to the rest of the community. If I can live with my conscience saying, yes, I don't care, let others get infected, I'm not going to take vaccine. Of course, such individuals are very much there. The cultural imprinting was such that women were in fewer numbers, and wherever they were there, they were phenomenally overburdened. They were not performing as well as their male colleagues because of this pressure on them to perform at home. And as a result, they do not perform as well as the male colleagues do. So they do not get awards, then they do not get promoted, they do not become directors, they do not have any power in hand, they are not sitting on the committees which will decide what should be research priorities for our country. All of this is by sidelining women. There are 5, 6, 7 contraceptives available for women. And that is presented as, look how much choice we are giving you. Now you can choose. But essentially, it's also the man who is contributing. It's not just women. And the men conveniently forget side effects of all the contraceptives that women have. Depression, problems about menstruation, all sorts of things happen. Many issues like, for example, women suffer from PCOD, menopause. These subjects are not extensively studied. There is very minimal funding on that. These priorities need to be thought through with a woman's perspective as well. And unless women are in a position of power, then only such priorities can change. That women get asked questions like, oh, so you are married, so when do you plan to have your first child? She can't say it's none of your concern. But this question is not asked to a man.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to WhatsApp Pro. Today, we are zooming into the action packed world of cells and antibodies with none other than Dr. Vineeta Bar. From thrilling research discoveries to empowering the next generation of women scientists, Dr. Bar has done it all. As a scientist and advocate, Dr. Bar has chased down viruses and also inspired women to wear the lab coat. Join us as she unpacks the stories of our immune system and reveals how she is paving the way for more women in STEM. Today's episode is divided into 2 parts. We talked about how vaccines work and why they are important, not just on a personal level, but also as a community as a whole. In the latter part of the episode, we discussed women empowerment. Why do we need more women to come into the workforce? And what challenges are they facing even in today's world? So, stay tuned till the end. Prepare for some infectious enthusiasm and mind-expanding insights. Let's welcome Dr. Vineeta Bar. Welcome, Dr. Bar, to WhatsApp Pro. Before we dive into your journey and you start sharing your experiences. Can you first explain what immunology is?
Yes, immunology in lay terms is a kind of study or area of study which tells us how our body responds to various bugs and beasts in a sense. So, viruses, bacteria, and we normally live a pretty healthy life despite being exposed to many of these bacteria and viruses. So, that study as to what does our system do, what happens early, what happens late, what are the factors which control such restrict the illnesses caused by the bugs. This is what the immunology is all about. So primarily, I would say it also has its minuses. So this is the real plus, that we survive because of the presence of the immune system, which provides protection against various infectious infections. But there are other problems also with the immune system, and allergy, for example, is one not so desirable manifestation of immune system. Autoimmune diseases is another undesirable manifestation of the immune system. There are also other things here and there, but essentially it is about us living pretty healthy life despite being getting infected by various what we call as pathogens, which means viruses and bacteria which infect us. So we don't fall ill as frequently as we would. And individuals who are extremely deficient in immune components actually don't survive. So if you have a minor problem, you will survive. But if it is a very severe problem, essentially pretty much absence of the immune system, the child will probably be born but will not survive for a more or less first day. The child would have infections, illnesses, and all of this. So when we survive, we don't realize the significance of the immune system, but it is quite important.
Right. So you actually like it's fighting against the bacterias, like daily bacteria.
Yes, bacteria, viruses. We don't encounter fungi so frequently, but even fungi, all sorts of infectious agents, if I can call it as a broad category.
Wow.
So, yeah.
So what drew you to this field? You were always interested in this field? Like how did you?
No, I won't say that. I am primarily trained as a medical doctor. So I was the 4.5 years of medical college. So BJ Medical College in Pune, that's where I was. And after that, there is 1 year of internship. So during internship, I was trying to think what is it that I would like to do. So internship experience also counted. And I realized that sort of, day to day practice or as a doctor is not something that is likely to maintain my interest in the profession. So should I be doing something different? And if it is different, what can it be? So I happened to read a couple of books, many books actually during internship, and realized that I would like to do something in research, because I thought at that time that there would be different challenges. At least it will not be 100% routine. There will be different things which I may have to think of and do. And that might be challenging enough. So that was the sort of decision making process during what we call as internship after the MBBS. And I decided to do an MD because some people told me. I went and met quite a few scientists, so to say, and doctors. And scientists, well, I wasn't sure that I would actually survive this change of stream. So I decided that I will do an MD, but in an area which will take me to research. And MD in microbiology was one avenue which was open to me. So I enrolled there. I joined Hapkin Institute on a research project while doing MD in microbiology. So it was like, trying to see if I can survive in this. If not, of course, if I, as and when I get MD degree, I can go back to the safe niche of being a medical doctor. That's how I moved from primarily a medical practitioner to sort of research.
Nice. So, tell us about your journey. Walk through your journey, like your early education until you become a researcher.
Well, of course, a long journey and very long time ago also. But I went to a school in Pune, Marathi medium school in Pune. After that, I went for a couple of years to Ferguson College and then got admission to BJ Medical College in Pune. So after that, there was internship. So 6 months in rural area and 6 months in urban areas. So sort of a hospital versus a primary health center. And experiences there were interesting. So at one point, I was also thinking that primary health center experience is interesting enough that should I be doing something in community medicine? So different avenues for research I was exploring in my mind that should I think of community preventive and social medicine or community medicine. And after that, I thought, let me explore research as an avenue. So I joined Hafkin Institute in Mumbai on a research project and registered for MD in microbiology and continued in 3 years. My MD was done. I also did a dissertation on a topic which at that point and even today actually is differently interesting in the sense I worked on a technique or a diagnostic, so to say, on for diagnosis of tuberculous meningitis. So one has to take cerebrospinal fluid and do the testing. The traditional method would need about 3 weeks before the tuberculosis bacilli were apparent and the confirmed diagnosis would be made. And this was a rudimentary, but it was an so-called ELISA, enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay. So protein from Mycobacterium tuberculosis could be detected by this technology, which was really primitive at that point. But that investigation could be completed in 24 hours. So at the end of 24 hours, there was a diagnosis of either TB meningitis or not TB meningitis, and that helped in treatment very, very radically. And there was effort on vague effort, which about which I wasn't really aware of trying to do commercial, handing over to company and so on. But this was in 80s, and there were no Indian companies, no technology transfer at that time, which was very apparent. So it died its natural death beyond the paper getting published. So after the MD, I again spent 3 years in Hafkin Institute itself working on a project which was on viral hepatitis. Many of us do fall ill with hepatitis, so it was a project on that. Then I did about 4 years of postdoc in London, in Hammersmith Hospital and in tuberculosis area as well. And then in 1990, I joined as a faculty at the National Institute of Immunology in New Delhi. So that job in Delhi was the longest lasting job, obviously. I spent 26 years there as an independent researcher. I had PhD students who worked with me. So almost all of my research output was because of the PhD students working. And after retirement, now I've shifted back to Pune, so-called hometown, and I teach primarily immunology at ISER Pune. That's the sort of huge, long spectrum.
Wow, that's totally different places you've been.
Yes.
That's nice. So in India, do we have so many labs and research papers? And how is it in India? Like how easy
Uh,
it is for new students?
yeah. In general, the quality of education, if one talks about it as whole India, there are only islands where good quality education is provided. So, what we called as institutes of national importance, for example, central universities like Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi University, or Hyderabad University. These are some of the well known universities which are better funded than, say, Pune University, which is where my degree comes from, the primary degree comes from. So, there is a difference in the ability to do research, and also if there is research output, then those universities are also automatically considered as better universities, and hence there is a better pool of students which will get attracted to better universities. But we have such large number of aspiring students nowadays, not something like 50 years ago, but university education is increasing in terms of attraction for young people who are, some of them are first generation college goers. So many of them do not manage to learn as much for a variety of reasons. They don't have support from home if there is requirement for some helping hand. They don't have time to work. Sometimes they are hungry. Sometimes, multiple social context. And I won't go into the details of that, but essentially, the students, even if students are bright, they don't necessarily manage to make it to research even if they want to. So there are multiple hurdles at multiple levels, and all said and done, the amount of funding that is available for higher education and for research institutions in India is pathetically low as compared to, say, United States or Europe or Australia and South Korea, Japan, many other developed countries. So we have large numbers and we have very minimal funding. So this is not the great combination. So we have, I teach in ICER now, and the students who finish 5-year course, which is the BSMS course, in that there are some really, really brilliant students. So one can't say that brilliance is not there. But again, for brilliant students, their ambitions are that they should get into a good PhD program. And unfortunately, the research culture in India is such that the progress is very slow. We have a lot of bureaucracy. So getting any chemical imported, for example, is it normally takes 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks here. And if one is working in the United States in any laboratory, as I'm going home at 5 p.m., I put in an order, and next morning, by the time I come to work, the chemical is already delivered and is available for me to take it further. So this slowness in research obviously affects the productivity, output, and so on. So most students who can afford it, who get the scholarships, or whose parents can afford to send them outside the country in developed world, they tend to send many students outside the country. And of course, you get good and bad experiences there. Some of them, many of them actually want to come back. But even when you come back, there has to be an opening. So there aren't enough openings. Periodically, the number of vacancies will go up. For example, about 15 years ago, ICERs were a craze, in the sense, soon after independence, Indian Institutes of Technology, so-called IITs, which are very, very popular. So they got established and they were attracting very brilliant students. But those were engineers. And the ICERs are equivalent of that in science. So it's Indian Institute of Science, Education and Research. So that is what it stands for, IISER. And there are by now, I think, about 12 to 15 ICERs. But the first one came up around 2005, 2006. So at that time, suddenly there are a lot of vacancy for many good scientists to come back, because different ICERs were coming up. They were offering positions slowly and steadily. For example, the department where I work these days as an emeritus professor, that's the biology department of ICER, there are no more vacancies in ICER biology department. End of it. All posts are filled. So even if there are brilliant students, brilliant postdocs, they don't necessarily manage to get the academic positions. And if you're looking at the private sector, like companies, there aren't so many of them in India. It's increasing, it's slowly increasing, but it is still not commensurate with the output that we see and the number of people who want the job. So almost, I mean, I said that I was in Delhi for 26 years, and over that period, I had about 22 or 23 PhD students who passed out as my students. I was their PhD supervisor. Pretty much nobody has come back. Maybe there are one or two who didn't go out of this country, but whoever went outside didn't manage to find a job back because, well, for one reason or another, it simply wasn't possible. So finding people in India who are doing good research, there are good institutions, all of this is a real small scale affair that we see. That's the problem.
Right. Yeah. So that's what I was coming to the openings like job opportunities and all. So how would you encourage new students to come in this field when there are not many openings, to say?
It is hard. It is really very hard. It was also hard when I was looking for jobs because after that, suddenly there was a spurt in funding. So there were more institutions which were interested in hiring. But it is really hard. So only vacancies. No, I should take it back. The regular vacancies are people like me retiring. So obviously, the position I was in did fall vacant, and there were many others who in the same institute over 3 or 4 or 5 year period. I think there were 8 or 9 of us who retired at the age of around 60 or so. So obviously, those vacancies popped up. But there are also government tendency now. This is what I see as an opening up of economy in 1990. From that time onwards, privatization has increased in every field. So everything is sort of, contracted or privatized. Contracts are also privatized. So there are no long term permanent jobs available, and even the sanctioned posts are not getting filled. This is not only a problem for postmen and police people and whoever, because we talk about that in the Indian context, that there are no jobs on offer. There are no jobs on offer even for scientists. So people train, they move out of this country, and then they find various opportunities here and there, and most of them don't come back. Very rarely, our students would think of coming back and actually being successful in getting a job.
Yeah. So moving back to your projects, how does your work in immunology research affect like average like common person?
Uh, if you look at the direct impact, my personal work had no direct impact on the society because the kind of work. So, I should tell you how my thinking was when I was thinking of research projects or conducting research projects. Being a medically trained person, I always had human health in my mind. That I do want to do something which will ultimately do good for the human health in whichever fashion, and I'll try and explain that to you. So that, of course, was the long term target, but to understand what the infectious diseases are. So a lot of my work is figuring out mechanisms of infectious diseases as they happen, but one can't do experiments on human beings. And because I was trained, I am trained as a doctor, my interest is in looking at the whole body and what is happening. So not just one part here or one part there, or only in what we call test tube or tissue culture, but I want to see what happens to the whole animals. It would have been great if I could see it in a whole human being, but those kinds of experiments are unethical in most instances. So the next best was doing experiments on mice. So a lot of work that I planned and executed actually was thinking of a problem in humans, finding something similar, what we call animal models of human disease, and then do working on those animal models to see what insights, what information do we get. I'll tell you one story so that will probably make sense. That I don't know about you, but certainly maybe your parents, me, that generation of people who went swimming in summer in swimming pools, which were not so clean at that time, certainly. We used to take so-called typhoid vaccine. And so the beginning of summer, take the vaccine. It was called TABC at that time. So it was typhoid, paratyphi A, paratyphi B, and cholera. So it was a combined vaccine injection. You take it for 48 hours, the arm will be swollen, there would be fever, and then you go swimming after the swelling has come down. So that was the vaccine, and we thought we were all really protected because we took vaccine. As I became an immunologist and started thinking, I realized that that vaccine was completely useless. It wasn't protecting. But we didn't know it at that time because immunological systems were also evolving over time. So by the time I started research in Delhi, in NII, I realized that was a wrong choice of a vaccine formulation. So, what is it that you need to protect you from Salmonella typhi, which causes typhoid? So, tried to think of a mouse model for typhoid, and it can't be Salmonella typhi, but a similar bacterium called Salmonella typhimurium, which is essentially causing mouse typhoid. So we worked on that for quite, I think, about 10 years at least, to figure out what is it that happens when there is infection with this salmonella, and as against the so-called vaccine. It's very similar to what we used to take. So the immune responses were very different. So what we need in salmonella infection is that the body should mount an immune response which will restrict the spread of the infection. Here, if you have an immune response which doesn't restrict the spread, then having an immune response and not having an immune response doesn't make any difference. You do need what we call as protective immune response. So the vaccines were not producing protective immune response. They were simply producing immune response. So this distinction is something that I thought was very important, and it was necessary that we think along these lines so that tomorrow meaning tomorrow in research are always 20 years, but tomorrow, if you are thinking of developing a vaccine against typhoid, this information should be useful. So you realize, so I always had human typhoid in mind. I never worked on human typhoid, but I worked on mouse typhoid, and insights from that actually, in principle, are really useful for designing typhoid vaccine in humans. So this is how I worked. As a result, my work, 10 years or whatever of work on this mouse model of typhoid, is of no direct benefit to human beings, but it has given sort of insights which will provide input into the vaccine development, very good vaccine development for typhoid in future. That's how I tend to relate. So the answer to your question is no direct impact, pretty much. But I would only think what I would say is in later life, I actually came across, started working with pediatricians and real life pediatricians, not mouse work. And some of the work that we did with them, I did with them, we thought about things together and did. Some of that was equally interesting. For example, that the neutrophils, I mean, soon after birth, how does the blood evolve with time? So the way it evolves in Indian infants, newborns, versus evolves in US based delivered babies is somewhat different. So, what could be the differences? So, we didn't even have this information. Again, I'm not saying this is useful in the sense of treating a child tomorrow, but oh, so there are differences. I see. So, what could be the reason? So then the thinking process continues, and you eventually can find something that might be interesting. So that's how I was saying that even later in my career, I did work with babies, not me directly, but in collaboration, because the immunology input was from our side, and the clinicians, pediatricians were actually working with children who were either sick or not sick. So pregnancy, childbirth, and so on and so forth. So that's how it is. But I don't think, if I want to be brutal about it, I don't think my research was ever useful to human beings as I went along. So
But,
not really useful.
but it creates a base for new researchers.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
So, talking about the vaccines, can you explain how vaccines work and how
Mhm.
important it is for public health?
So again, let me talk about theory and then the reality of the vaccine. If we are looking at vaccines, we expect vaccines to protect us from the actual disease, right? The example that I took of typhoid, the childhood typhoid vaccine was not protective, but the way I'm visualizing will be protective. So, what is it that our data showed that immune response of this kind, let's say type A immune response, just as to simplify rather than getting into the details. So, type A immune response is useful and protective in typhoid. Type B immune response is not protective. So, when we want to design a vaccine, we want to see that the vaccine would generate type A immune response in the vaccinee and not necessarily type B immune response. So, this is the what should be the basic basis for designing a vaccine. So, if we look at, say, smallpox vaccine, that maybe you also had it or maybe you didn't have it, but certainly we have the scars of smallpox vaccine on my arm. So, smallpox vaccine, when it was developed, we had no notions of how to evaluate immune response. So, it was arbitrarily, what we would call empirically tried. It was successful, and we were grateful for whoever discovered it, that the smallpox eventually got eradicated in mid 70s. But if you really look at it, after that there haven't been very many successes, because empirical approach worked for one disease, empirical approach did not work for many other diseases. So that is the problem. And for, you know very well, for HIV, for example, HIV AIDS, we know this disease at least since 1987, 1988, for so many years, nearly 40 years, but we don't have a vaccine even today. Malaria, we know probably for 100 years. And it's in the last 10 years that there is a not so great, but some a vaccine available for malaria, for prevention of malaria in humans. So it takes that much. And essentially, the principle of it is that vaccine should generate an immune response which will provide protection from the subsequent infection by that bug. So, if it is a malaria vaccine, then next time you are getting bitten by the mosquito and the mosquito is introducing the malarial parasite in you, the normal situation in unvaccinated would be that it would cause malaria, small scale, large scale, whichever. But if you are vaccinated, even after introduction of malarial parasites, you should not fall ill. So there are two categories. I should not fall ill. If we have seen this in SARS-CoV-2, the pandemic that we saw, COVID pandemic, that many people fell ill, and many people, even without vaccine, had infection, but they did not fall ill. So infection and infection plus illness are sort of, subsequent steps. So all of us will get infection. A subset of that would fall ill. So it could be because I'm immunodeficient, because I'm old, maybe because of pregnancy and I become vulnerable, one or the other, many reasons. So the same dose of whatever virus that a young one gets, a young healthy adult, say 18-year-old, no illness, and the same dose a 65 or 70-year adult gets or old person gets, and the a person will fall ill. So in getting infection and getting illness, so priority these days and all along is that post vaccination individuals should not fall ill. They will get infection, but there is enough immunity in the body so that the illness is certainly prevented, at least minimally. That is the requirement for a vaccine, and some vaccines are better at it, some vaccines are not so great at it, and it varies depending on whether it's a virus, whether it is a bacterium, whether it is a parasite like malaria or leishmania, and so on and so forth. So that diversity one needs to take into account and sort of tailor make vaccines, which we haven't been successful in most diseases. And most diseases actually are the ones, except for HIV, which affect the developing world, what we call as lower and middle income countries. Those countries where such infections are common, illnesses are common, the vaccines are not searched on. And we had SARS-CoV-2 COVID vaccines because COVID affected Italy, United States, Europe as much as it affected us sitting in India. So that's why we happened to get vaccines for COVID. If it was not the United Developed World getting infected, we wouldn't have gotten it.
Oh. How about flu vaccine? Flu vaccine is very like, especially in US, every
Yeah.
year we have to go through this parade. Like the whole family goes for flu vaccine.
True, true. And flu is a very peculiar case to some extent. COVID and COVID virus, that's the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and flu have some similarity, well, behavioral similarity, I should say. That the flu virus can be of 2, 3, 5, 10 different types. We call them flu. It's called identified as H1N1 or H3N2 and so on and so forth. Sometimes it's a bird flu, sometimes it's a pig flu, and so on and so forth. All of those, most of those can infect human beings, but peculiarity of flu virus is that it undergoes changes, what we call mutations in its nucleic acid, very, very frequently. And because of which the flu virus, which is prevalent this year, will not be the same next year. So the vaccine you prepared for this year may not work next year. That's exactly what was happening with COVID also. That initially in India, at least I remember, first wave was not called anything very much when there was complete lockdown in India. Then there was a Delta wave, which created havoc in India. All hospitals were full, very many people were dying, no oxygen, very, really, really horrifying condition. And the one after that was primarily by some variant changed virus called Omicron. So Omicron is also related to Delta, also related to the first one, COVID virus, SARS-CoV-2, but there was enough difference. And essentially, those people who got infected with Delta, it was like, a natural vaccine, if you can call it, that they were infected by Delta variant and they had good immune response, they survived, and then Omicron didn't matter so much. Or even if Omicron infected me, I didn't fall ill like I fell ill the first time. So that is as I said, the rapid mutational changes is common between SARS-CoV-2 and influenza. And influenza has been there for, I don't know, more than 100 years. There is a first wave which was reported. I think first pandemic was something like 1900, 1800 and something, if I'm not mistaken. But certainly so-called Spanish flu was 1910, which is more than 100 years ago. But because the virus changes and because it can go back to the chicken and then come back again, it's a different virus, and we don't know how to predict what changes it will undergo. So that's why for flu, every year scientists are now watching, isolating flu virus from whoever is getting unwell and looking at the pattern. So as compared to say last December, this October, November, what is the change that we are noticing? So now make a vaccine against this changed virus. That's why your earlier vaccine is of no use. The changed virus vaccine against the changed virus is useful. That's why most people, especially in the old age homes and so on, and situations where individuals which are vulnerable to get ill, they tend to be given flu vaccines annually. And especially in cold weathers, it's much harder because it's all inside, problems of recirculation and so on and so forth, compound effects on lung infections. So most people tend to get this advice from the doctors that do take flu shots. If in another 5-10 years the same logic is used for COVID, I wouldn't be surprised. But today, at least all of us are immune, so probably we are surviving without boosters.
So yeah, like every year we have to go to
Yes.
take a, flu
Shot.
vaccine. Now
Yeah.
I know why we have to take it every year, because some of like last year everybody was taken, whoever has taken flu vaccines, they got flu, they got infected with flu, and then like this vaccine is of no use now. I'm not going to take it every year, and then people stop taking vaccines.
Yes. Yes. But one has to remember that, individually, vaccine will provide, say, more protection or less protection. But we have to look at it as a community effectiveness. So, what people think of, say, if there are 1,000 people in a certain community, and if, say, 700 got vaccinated, then the remaining 300 might actually get protected because the 700 are protected. Okay, so this is what is called as herd immunity, that the herd is protected, so the minority will get protected as well. So sometimes the herd immunity doesn't work because the virus itself took revenge in a sense and came in a different garb. As a result, the vaccination was not very useful. So it changes with the virus. And if you look at, say, chikungunya virus, so far there isn't really a great vaccine, but chikungunya hasn't been shown to undergo so many changes, so many mutations. So different things, different kinds of virus. There are RNA viruses, DNA viruses. So flu virus is an RNA virus. So RNA viruses tend to undergo these mutations or the changes much more rapidly, much more easily than the so-called DNA viruses.
Yeah, it's interesting. So this vaccine misconceptions you cleared, but any other misconceptions that you come across about immune system?
Uh, well, yes, in a sense, uh, again, during so called pandemic time, everybody was mortally afraid, justifiably so. In a sense, there was no reason to be so afraid, but every other person was falling sick. And if you look at whether the people were dying, they were not dying so much. They were, as compared to some of the lethal viral infections on the African continent, if you look at them like Ebola and others, they really have Ebola and Marburg. They have 70 or 80% of the infected people dying. This was never the case with SARS-CoV-2. So, in that sense, SARS-CoV-2 was not that dangerous a virus, but there was a major, major panic. And what I was saying about individuals versus the community, sometimes the individuals are not getting adequate immune response. Elderly people is one category. So if elderly people are not getting not mounting a good immune response, and if the in the elderly homes there is sudden introduction of SARS-CoV-2, and vaccinated or unvaccinated, everybody comes down with SARS-CoV-2, then people keep thinking that, oh, it is not useful. Then why should I take it? So this misconception needs to be explained to some extent. All of us are different individuals. We are not identical twins or identical whatever. So our responses are different, somewhat different between even men and women. The responses are different. So this is something that we as science communicators fail to communicate, saying that the differences are there. So some people will have a better response, some people will have a relatively poorer response. And because of that, somebody is more prone to get infection on exposure and illness. Sometimes people will not get, some others will not get it. So this is one misunderstanding, that everyone needs to be identically protected. The other thing is somewhat it's again changes with vaccine, but there are so-called adverse events, as we call it, or side effects. So some vaccines have what we call as Guillain-Barré syndrome as one of the side effects. And very commonly, Guillain-Barré syndrome is a paralysis of extremities, but it is recoverable. So this happens in a very small proportion of cases, but it gets publicity very extensively. Even for the SARS-CoV-2 vaccines, you must have heard that if people took mRNA vaccines, they were more susceptible to cardiac problems. If they took vaccines the way we took vaccines based on adenovirus vaccines, the one Covishield, which was manufactured by Serum Institute in this country, there was another side effect of bleeding and clotting, and that if you look at the frequency, it was one in, I think, 500,000 to 1 million. So it was not a common effect. But once somebody has it, it is, for that person, it is certainly a tragedy, no doubt about it. Certainly no excuses there. But again, one also has to look at it in from a what we would call public health perspective, that vaccination has prevented serious illness in, say, 95% of the vaccinated individuals, and 1% died. So do you, for the person who was so sick and died, of course it is unfortunate, but do we also need to think that 95% of the people who were completely protected by the vaccine should not be protected? So that's the balance that one has to look at. So this misconception that vaccine has no side effects, that's wrong. Vaccine has tolerable side effects like fever and something, which are very, very common. Most of them are tested before the vaccines are approved. So it's not like, that's why I said that somebody like me all my life worked on mice. But even vaccines are primarily developed, tested in mice. The people, it's checked that they do not have hazardous consequences, the vaccinated mice, and then only they are permitted for human use. So this step that is there as what is called as preclinical toxicity testing, that is actually done. However, the very rare ones, like 1 in 500,000, you can't detect. So those serious side effects, serious adverse events are very much there. And because of this, and also there are people who actually who resist taking vaccination. And again, you have to look at it from a social responsibility, that if my family does not take vaccines and my family falls ill, I am responsible for spreading that infection to the rest of the community. If I can live with my conscience saying, yes, I don't care, let others get infected, I'm not going to take vaccine. Of course, such individuals are very much there. And I gather that in the developed countries, people who are against vaccines are increasing. As compared to that, in India, for example, the number went up a little bit, percentage went up a little bit during COVID time. But in general, there isn't such huge resistance to taking vaccines in India. probably in most of the developed countries. It could be because we don't get enough internet based, Google based reading that we do. I mean, I know elites do, but not everybody and anybody who takes vaccine necessarily has access to that and hence may not have enough knowledge. Various factors contribute. But in general, the phobia against vaccines is much lesser in the developing countries as compared to developed countries.
Wow, nice. Let's now move to your other activities than research. Like you have been a very strong advocate for women in science.
Yeah.
Why do you think it is important for more women to enter scientific field?
Uh, I think if is well if I can invoke Constitution of India, I can invoke many other things saying that there should be equal opportunity, freedom to do what I want, freedom to do this, freedom to do that. So starting from constitutional values and guidelines, the women should be able to make choices that what drives them, what interests them. And with time, I mean, in Maharashtra, in Pune especially, there is a tradition of Mahatma Jyotiba Phule, Savitribai Phule, so that women's education, women's empowerment was something that started happening that far back, which is 150 years ago. So once women started getting more education, their eyes opened up, they actually wanted to do something more. And this wanting to do something more than what they were permitted to do is the basis why I think women should also come to science. Because now, if you look at it, there are interesting numbers that one can see. In India, if you look at PhD admissions, forget about earlier ones. You probably know that in class 12, there are so called class 12 toppers in the board exam, ICSC exam, and so on and so forth. So, also in class 10, and many more young girls are toppers as compared to boys. So, this means that women or girls are nowhere lagging in terms of their intelligence, capacity to study, capacity to write exams and score. So, they if their ambitions take them further, then should they not go ahead? But normally, what happens is young girls are also all of us actually. Why young girls? All of us are a product of our culture. So we are told that women's space is in the house, looking after husband and in-laws, and giving rise to babies and looking after them. And this is so imprinted that we don't think of anything beyond it. But in some women, the ambition of doing something with their education, doing something for themselves, doesn't die so easily despite cultural imprinting. And then they manage to reach, say, become PhDs, for example. So if you look at biology only, because I am a biologist, I know more data about biology. But if you look at entrance to PhD in India in broad discipline of life sciences biology, there are close to 50% women and men. So the number of men and women who want to do PhD is very similar. Those who pass out are also similar. So at that point, at the level of finishing PhD, men and women are pretty much equal in number in biology. But if you look at any biology department in this country, the number of women faculty is not more than 20%. So between those 50% and 20%, the 30% of the output has just disappeared. And why do they disappear? Because you have to think about what is the age by which we get PhD. 26, 27. It is an age when everybody puts enormous pressure on girls and not necessarily on boys, but I'm sure boys are willing partners to get married. So get married, then you are getting old. No, you have to become pregnant. And once you are pregnant and you have at least one child, the life is just goes off track. Because I mean, there is a lot of physiology which changes. There are demands on your body, there are demands on your brain, all sorts of things, feeding issues, illnesses. In all of this, women get completely dragged. I'm not necessarily saying they all of them always enjoy it. Those who enjoy it, let them enjoy it. But not every woman enjoys it. So this is something that we had been seeing. And again, the cultural imprinting was such that women were in fewer numbers in biology or actually any science stream, and wherever they were there, they were phenomenally overburdened. They will not be performing as well as their husband, because many women scientists have their husbands also as scientists, but even otherwise they were not performing as well as their male colleagues because of this pressure on them to perform at home. So double burden, triple burden, as it is called. So this is something that I have been seeing, and I am a single woman, and for whatever reason I had a great interest in career, great interest in doing what I was doing. I certainly wanted to be financially independent. So, in a way, marriage and children, family did not drag me down, and I could continue. But anybody around me, I could see that they were really struggling to keep up to date in science, to plan for their work, to execute their work. They were always looking tired. You should see women who have just delivered a child, 3 months maternity leave, and they have come back. It's very hard, very painful to see them working because they don't have energy to work, and there is pressure on them. So all of this was telling me that even when there is drive, there is no support structure for these women. So we need support structure, and the support structure can be, things like creche, of course, yes. But if the child is unwell, who goes running to the creche? The mother goes, not the father. So, this again, if the mother doesn't go, she is blamed. So, she will blame herself, and the family would blame her. So, this is the what we call as patriarchy, which brings down the women all the time, which I had seen. And I have also been a part of women's movement in India from donkey's years, I suppose 80s onwards. So that was in my mind, that women are getting sidelined in every walk of life. They do not have financial independence, they do not have a say, they are really sidelined. So this was very much there as general women, as I would consider. But then suddenly, when I started working in Delhi, I realized that why did I not think of women scientists? Because they are also part of the same society. They are also equally harassed in by such circumstances, and as a result, they do not perform as well as the male colleagues do. So they do not get awards, then do not get promoted, they do not become directors, they do not have any power in hand, they do not have they are not sitting on the committees which will decide what should be research priorities for our country. All of this is by sidelining women. So if this is happening, one needs to do something about it, is what I thought. And started talking about it. And one classic example which I gave at that time, and it is still true, is that there are 5, 6, 7 contraceptives available for women, right? There are pills, there are injectable contraceptives, and the sort of female condom as well, and diaphragm, and so on and so forth, the copper T. All of these are there, and that is presented as, look how much choice we are giving you. Now you can choose. But what the hell about that man who is responsible for depositing sperms? Sorry to use this language, but essentially it's also the man who is contributing. It's not just women. And the men conveniently forget side effects of all the contraceptives that women have. Depression, problems about menstruation, all sorts of things happen, but they are completely ignored. And I kept saying that men keeps thinking that no, they cannot take any medication for controlling their sperm production because it's the manliness which is at stake. All of this is actually rubbish. Reason why this is happening is because who is directing research? Men in power. There are only men who are in power in any country. So they are thinking of research priorities. They are thinking of funding. This is high priority area. That is high priority area. So if there is huge amount of funding for developing women's contraceptives and no funding for men's contraceptives, all research will be directed at women's contraceptives, right? And not at men's contraceptives. Outcome is what we are seeing today. So many issues like, for example, women suffer from PCOD, the polycystic ovarian syndrome. Women suffer from endometriosis, and so on and so forth. Menopause. These subjects are not extensively studied. There is very minimal funding on that. So these priorities need to be thought through with a woman's perspective as well. And unless women are in a position of power, if I can call that, because men are normally in a position of power. So if women are in a position of power, then only such priorities can change. So that was the sort of, long and short thought process in my mind. Not that I have managed to achieve a lot, but there are a few things which are happening. So that's how I started working and talking about it probably from mid 90s, 93, 94 onwards. And I still continue to do whatever I can.
Wow, you explained it so well. Like you actually gave the actual scenario that's happening there, right? And you were also a member of Prime Minister's task force.
Yeah.
What was that about?
That was actually a great thing to be initiated at that time point because feminist movements were talking about sidelining of women. There was also general tempo. There were some of us who had started talking about women scientists. So at some point, it was accepted. There was also an India Science report which had come out. I think it had come out in 2002 or 2000, thereabouts, sometime. And that talked about the status of science within India, but it was completely gender agnostic report. There were no preferences of girls versus boys checked that. It was only in by 10th standard how many individuals are there, and by 12th standard how many in physics discipline versus this discipline. But between men and women, there was no segregation of data. But maybe because of that and various things that people were thinking about and talking about, that it was conceived that a uh, task force for women in science was established. I was one of the members of it. I think it was from 2005 to 2009 or thereabouts. And the idea was that there were about three or four men, and about 8 or 9 women as members of that. And Professor Mehtab Bamji from Hyderabad was the chair. So she was quite keen, and what we had as a mandate was judging the situation of women scientists in this country and bring up a report, status report, so to say, and then make recommendations what can be done to change the situation if the situation is not good. This is so this was the task that was given to us, and over those 3-4 years, I remember we went to different parts of the country, Assam and Bangalore and here and there and different parts of the country, and talked to women to find out what their problems were, what was it that they would like, what they were not getting, and so on and so forth. And there was a good report which was brought about, as well as recommendations for the government to take steps so that there can be further improvement. So this report was submitted to the government, and also in 2008, around 8th of March, or maybe actually on 8th of March, I forget the dates now. So around the International Women's Day in 2008, there was a national level conference for of women scientists, which was organized. So there were I was, of course, this was also part of this Prime Minister's task force, one of the last charters that we had. So we actually organized that conference in Vigyan Bhavan in Delhi, and we looked for women scientists as speakers. Speakers in five or six, I forget the details now, but there were five or six different themes which were there depending on the primary areas. And in that, we found competent women scientists who could give talks. That conference was a huge success. There were first day there were 700 or 800 women who were present in Delhi. It was of course funded by the government, but still there so many women scientists came together, and everybody felt a huge sense of solidarity that all of us are actually here we are brought together. But when we get dispersed, it's like, we are so much of a minority that there is no impact of our existence. So that's something that was done at that time. And there were supposed to be many follow ups, many recommendations made by the task force. But unfortunately, that didn't work. All that happened, we were trying to say, was do a gender audit, put up on every institution's sarkari or government organization's website, put out the number of women that you have in employment at various levels this year. Tell us next year how much is the improvement. We are not expecting day and night differences, but if you have 3% to begin with, can you go up to 4% next year? So the next recruit, can it be a woman? Because this kind of discrimination also we had seen and we had noted that women get asked questions like, oh, so you are married, so when do you plan to have your first child? And when the woman says no, I mean, she can't say it's none of your concern, but this question is not asked to a man. So essentially, women are discriminated against from employment when, one, they are marriageable age, or they are newly married and may get pregnant in the next year or two. So this discrimination actually leaves them out of the workforce. And that we see so very often. So that is what we try to recommend, that this should be avoided, that should be avoided. Every committee should have women. But if women who are sitting in the committee are not of this kind of conviction, then there is no difference between a woman sitting and a man sitting. So again, it's pointless in a way. So the recommendations I still feel were quite useful, and including things like there should be a mandatory creche available on campus. There should be extra money given if there is no creche for women. But once there is a creche, men also put their children into the creche. So it's not like it's only women who need it. It's all small children need creche, but even those are not properly implemented. Well, it was a good beginning, but it died in unnatural death, I feel.
Nowadays, this work-life balance is a new
True.
concept that is popped in. What is your thought about it?
Women have very critical balancing act. Men have less critical balancing act. That's what I feel. Both have to do balancing acts, but the men have to do it much less. And also, it's something that one has to remember, that if there are, for example, even in biology, if there are seven, eight, nine male colleagues, and I'm the only woman colleague, unless I feel comfortable, I can't necessarily mingle in the crowd. Otherwise, I'll be sitting in my room if this is a conference outside the hometown that's happening. And then men will discuss something, funding opportunities, this, that, and the other, and I will be missing out on that. So, this is something that keeps happening. And men do not realize that they have such networks which operate and which benefit only, again, men. They do not even think that there could be women who will be equally competent, but they haven't applied because they didn't even know that such an opportunity existed. So this so the balance that we were talking about, it's always undermining women's abilities of performing well as compared to men's ability. So balance is a balance, but we know how critical balance is.
Yeah. So, any advice for upcoming scientists, researchers, especially women?
I think this is easy for me to say because I am at what's this stage of life. But at the same time, I think in India there are still traditional marriages. So whatever there is no, even if it is a love marriage, I think most husband and wife to be do not talk to each other to understand what is it that they are expecting from life. You talked about the balance, but what is it that they are expecting from life? And if the woman has ambitions, is that going to get anywhere at all? So whether there is money, whether there are enough there is enough jewelry there, is there enough salary there, but beyond that, for mental satisfaction, you also need to do something which will satisfy your intellect, your curiosity, your this, that, and the other. So those discussions do not happen at the time of discussions regarding marriages. So our parents need to be educated about this, and also the girls who are trying to get into marriage and boys. So sensitization of men is such an important point, that men have it normally easier than women. I'm not saying it's all easy for them. They also have pressure of earning enough to keep their family going. But at the same time, there are many things which are in their favor. So in a sense, if the man and a woman, before getting into engagement, marriage, and whatever, actually discuss such issues and try to convince their parents. So parents also need to be educated. This is not going to be a short term suggestion, but that is something that will help. So at least if there is commitment, then maybe at some point the woman can say, but you agreed and now you do need to help me in kitchen or help me in doing this or that, so that I can actually do what I want. So it may or may not work in every case, but simply because nobody thinks that there is a option to marriage, which I disagree with. But most people also, unfortunately, do not even think that there could be options. So marriage is such an inevitability in life for both men and women, that that has to happen. If that has to happen, then at least see to it that you have some negotiating space in the marriage and the life thereafter. Otherwise, women suffer extensively. They suffer. So whether women so we need to have a partner which is sensitive, both partners which are sensitive to each other's needs. That's what I think is important. And that's what is sort of, either it will make your career or it will break your career. So that needs to be thought of. But if women are not so driven, and if they are happy to stay at home even after a PhD, who am I to say that you should actually do it? All I think is, so much of money has been spent, so much of energy has been spent on getting that PhD, and now if you don't want to use it, were you actually interested in doing it in the first place, or even that was a social pressure? Who knows? Those kinds of pressures do operate on men, though. They have to make their career. They can't afford not to earn. So that's also a pressure on them.
Right. But do you see any change nowadays, like this new generation that is coming up?
uh, in a way, small changes are seen. So, for example, the newer institutions are actually getting some of them. When I was working at that time, most places had this unwritten rule, unwritten, mind you, unwritten rule of not hiring husband and wife in the same institution. So obviously the wife suffered because she was always younger. Traditionally man is 3, 4, 5, 10, whatever years older than her. So he will finish his postdoc first, PhD first. He will be looking for a job. And while she's, following him and at a suboptimal level. So if both husband and wife cannot be given a job, then the wife is never going to get a good job, which means she's already losing out on her career. Now, there are some enlightened men, because again, unfortunately, still men are in power, but some of my friends I know, they are very, very aware of this. And for example, in ISER Pune, so ISER Pune started in 2006. And in biology department, there are at least one, two, three husband and wife pairs within biology department. So this is something that is unusual. Otherwise, normally, woman is somewhere, man is somewhere. So that's the usual story. But here, there was enough encouragement to say, no, we will hire, so we will consider both of you, and jobs were offered. Not for everyone, but at least there was not a complete prejudice saying, no, we are not offering. So that makes a difference, that starts making a difference. So such changes are seen now. But again, these are minority institutions and minority places. But when you see them, you realize that, oh, okay, if one pushes hard enough, there are few people who realize importance of this. And I also keep saying, whenever I give talks on women science, importance of this and that, I keep saying that normally men have this huge pressure on them, patriarchal pressure, that they are the earners of the family. So the wife, whether she's educated or not educated, doesn't matter. She earns money or not, doesn't matter. He has to earn money, and he cannot not earn money. So that in itself is a huge pressure. Imagine now, he and his wife both are earning more or less the same amount of money, how much easier it is in terms of that pressure not being there. So it's an advantage even for a man. So in return, should he be doing something which the wife's salary is helping in the running of the family? So these kinds of thoughts need to be introduced. So the advantages of having a working wife, having financial stability, because again you are thinking of the next generation where you can educate your kids well and so on and so forth. So if there is stability, so I know I'm talking about the upper crust of the society, but women scientists are in the upper crust of the society, so I can't talk about poverty in this context. So this is this is something that is beneficial. So, can we also sensitize men repeatedly, saying, look at the advantages? And you do find some men who uh, benefit from such thoughts. So, that's also something that's useful, but essentially, we do need to have a very long, untiring effort to make any small changes. The other thing, actually, which has happened is the sexual harassment at workplace. So this was always a problem because I personally also faced two, three episodes of sexual harassment when I was working as a faculty woman. So many others, I'm sure, were facing it, and especially this is true when the boss is a man and the PhD student is a woman. So these equations are there. Sexual harassment is very much there. But now that there is a law for sexual harassment, prevention of sexual harassment at workplace, so there are committees which are mandatory on paper, mandatory in every institute, research institute, educational institute, and whoever is suffering from sexual harassment should be complaining, and there is a theoretical possibility of redressal. And also these committees are supposed to do the sensitization job, where the men should be sensitized. Again, there is phenomenal resistance on the side of the men. Oh, what does it have to do with us? Is the question. They are the harassers, but they will ask this question. So it's hard uphill task, but it has to be done.
It's a very good food for thought for both men and women. Thank you so much for sharing all your experiences and
My
this
pleasure.